Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Interesting podcast we have coming for you today. It's all about ethics, specifically business ethics. And when you think of it, everything we do is pretty much controlled or governed by these business ethics. We do business every single day. Even if you're just a regular person, if you want to call it that, you make a purchase, you are exposed to business ethics of some type. He is somebody that has taught this for many years, has done a lot of research on it. And we're going to today talk about the right decision for the right reason with different situations, different cases involving ethics. Ronald Berenbeim is back with us. Welcome back, Ronald. How are you?
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Very well, very well. And this begins, I guess, a series of podcasts on making the right decision for the right reason. What are we going to focus on today?
Today, we're going to focus on the case of Claudine Gay, who was president of Harvard University for a brief period of time. And you may have, you undoubtedly have read about that or heard about it. And full disclosure, I went to Harvard Law School. My wife is a graduate of the graduate school, and my daughter, not to be outdone, was both an undergraduate and a graduate student at Harvard. So even though it's about Harvard, this qualifies as kitchen table issues. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. So how about we start with a little bit of background?
Okay. Well, Claudine Gay, you may recall, was a Black woman. She had served Harvard in various different capacities, I think, for about 11 years. She was a pretty high-ranking person on the inside. And when Larry Bacow announced his retirement after a search, the trustees, otherwise known as the corporation, their chair being Penny Pritzker, former Secretary of Commerce, selected Claudine Gay to be the next president of Harvard. And she was a Black woman. Harvard had had a woman president preceding her prior to Bacow, named Drew Gilpin Faust, very distinguished historian, even before she was named, and a most excellent president of Harvard, at least in my opinion. But it had not had a Black woman. So in any event, they did select her. And so now, as everyone knows, and everybody has their own explanation, and their own interpretation of the situation, but she was president only for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe a little more, maybe a little less.
Up until about a week and change ago.
Right. And you are still seeing newspaper stories about that situation every day, and new information is coming to light, and new people are stepping forward. So when we analyze this decision, we begin with the question of whose job it is to make it. And in this case, it was what Harvard calls the corporation. It's what many would call its trustees or its board of directors. Its head being a rather formidable woman named Penny Pritzker, who was President Obama's Secretary of Commerce, and went to Harvard, and is, as I said, a formidable personality. Now, what was their job? They had to select a new president of Harvard. What were their motives or objectives? That's the first question one always asks. Now, you would think that motives and objectives are always transparent and always perfectly obvious. Now, in this case, of course, They obviously needed a president, so we can go at least that far. But as the French statesman Talleyrand once, when informed by his young aide that the Russian ambassador had died, Talleyrand asked what were his motives. And so motives are always something that are both transparent and not. But the purpose of making a decision which can be broadly defined as ethical has one or at least one of two objectives, sometimes both. And one objective is to improve the situation. You will recall that the first words of the Constitution say, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." In other words, the Constitution is guideline for continuing to improve that union. And the other purpose is repair. There's an old statement from the Talmud or whatever phrase called tikkun olam, which is mending the world. So you're going to try to repair something that needs to be fixed. And then the bottom line there is that you are not going to be able to entirely succeed in your objective, but that does not relieve you of the opportunity to undertake the task. So in doing so, you have three tools. You have markets or economics broadly defined. That would be Jeremy Bentham consequentialism. And you have law, that's obvious enough. And you have ethics or philosophy. So let's take each one of those and look at the decision that the trustees made and look at how Claudine Gay responded to the challenge in each one of these cases. All right. So first we have markets. Now, the problem with Bentham's formulation and with economics is that markets do not always work to the advantage of all the participants. And the reason for that is what we call externalities. I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, and this will be showing my age, my family bought a 1954 Chevrolet for about $2,000. Now, I understand that new cars today, even garden variety ones, cost about $50,000. Even in constant dollars, that's a huge increase in price. Now, that Chevrolet was a very good car. I'm not sure I ever owned or drove a better one. It employed thousands of people under union wages, very significant amount of pay. Many of them had second fishing homes in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The chairman of General Motors was Times Man of the Year. What's not to like about this? What are we leaving out here? We are leaving out externalities, which are costs as a result of this result that other people have to pay. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of carbon emissions, and today we have climate change, which may well be due to many of those accumulation of carbon emissions. We had untold injuries and highway deaths. We had no airbags. We had no safety belts. We had no GPS systems. We had a highway system that was just beginning to get organized. And so you had lots of external costs that were being paid, not by the consumers, not by the workers, not by the shareholders, not by the top employees like Harlow Curtis, the chief executive office, but not only by people who were invisible to the decision makers, but were invisible because they were part of a future generation. So it was hardly a perfect situation. And if there had been some effort to think about the externalities, the car might have been priced more fairly. The second one is law. I don't have to go into too much detail over, law is not the end of a discussion. It is the end of a conversation without end. We are even today reading in the newspaper about the various interpretations of the 14th Amendment and so on and so forth. So it's not the end of the discussion, but it at least provides what you call guardrails. It sort of contains the discussion within certain parameters. And then finally, you have ethics or virtue. What is the most ethical, the most virtuous solution to the problem? And personal virtue was the province of Aristotle, who talked a lot about it, human virtues, but he also more or less acknowledged implicitly or explicitly that they could only be achieved through an institutional structure. And that work he left to his student Plato, who wrote a book called The Republic, in which he talked about how that might be accomplished. Now, in more modern times, we have a fellow by the name of John Rawls, who talks about what he calls the original position. And what he says, emerging from the veil of ignorance, what rules would you make? What rules would you make to maximize human welfare? What rules would you make to protect the disadvantaged? Okay, so that's our framework for discussion with Claudine Gay, and we go back to that. The trustees evidently thought, and a lot of people would undoubtedly agree, as a matter of fact, most people would probably agree, that it would be an excellent thing for Harvard to have a Black woman president who with a proven performance record at Harvard, just to make things a little easier to adjust to the situation. And so the trustees chose Claudine Gay. Now, they didn't take into full consideration just how well this would go over with the rest of their community. And among these, I would just single out two people who were especially active. One of them was a gentleman named Bill Ackman, head of Pershing Investments. He too was a graduate of Harvard. He felt that, I guess he felt, and I think he felt, and actually it's made it evident that he felt he wasn't getting enough respect, and that Harvard's curriculum was being distorted in favor of the humanities and also in favor of teaching history in a way that sounded a little bit unfamiliar to him by certain quote unquote elites who had the nerve, at least so he felt, to be even a little bit patronizing to a guy like him. The other person was Alyssa Slotkin. also, like Ackman, a graduate of Harvard, member of Congress. And she was a Republican, and as many Republicans have, saw the cultural gaps widening between a sort of patronizing and condescending elites and their interpretation of the way the world works or has worked, and their own. And they gave a word to this kind of behavior. They called it woke, W-O-K-E. So in comes Claudine Gay at about the same time that the Israeli-Gazan situation erupts, and 34 organizations at Harvard signed a letter. Their chief officer signed a letter on behalf of their organization to Ms. Gay, the president, saying that they thought that the Israeli conduct of the war, bombing Gazans for the horror that had been inflicted on them, they protested that. They took exception to it. What they did not advocate, as Ms. Slotkin or someone else in those hearings said or implied, support for genocide. Nonetheless, they framed it in that way, and they asked President Gay what she thought about that, and whether what Alyssa Slotkin called bullying and harassment of Jewish people, which arguably that letter was not an example, needed to be dealt with harshly by the university. And Claudine Gay responded, well, it depends on the context. Well, that kind of stuff, that kind of evasive answer infuriated a lot of people. But the trustees stood behind her. And then some eager beavers got to work and found something that was, in the first instance, rather obvious, that as an academic, Claudine Gay had a fairly slim resume, not too many articles, no books, not much of a reputation in her field. She had mostly been what you might call a bureaucrat of one sort or another at Harvard for much of her time there. And then the second, perhaps even more damning thing, was that they kept finding examples of plagiarism, not just failure to attribute, but direct quotations without the quotation marks. Harvard stood behind Claudine Gay until they began to find the examples of plagiarism. And once they did, that gave them a bright line distinction for basically showing her the door, which the official word is that she resigned. But they gave her a nice soft landing, $900,000 salary as a faculty member. I've been a faculty member. My daughter's a faculty member. Neither one of us ever got paid $900,000.
That's more than a soft landing, I would believe.
And so that's where we are now. And
so I have a question, based on all of that.
Now's the time. We're done. That's the story, and that's the issues.
Do you personally feel, Ronald, that they, whoever they are, went looking for something and found what was believed to be plagiarism? Do you think they were looking for that based on previous situations related to the war, comments and such?
I think they were looking for it because it's a pretty good working hypothesis, which with almost any academic, quite frankly. And in fact, it's come to light that Ackman's wife, who is an academic and I think was or is on the faculty at MIT, also had a certain number of instances of that kind of behavior as well. It's I'm not apologizing. I'm not defending it, but I'm saying that it is not too hard to find, and it was a reasonable hypothesis, reasonable basis on which to begin to look.
And from what I understand, I haven't read the story deeply. And yeah, she did resign January 2nd. It appears based on accounts that the amount of plagiarism was pretty substantial. It wasn't one or two articles that were plagiarized. It was a significant amount. But do you think that if the situations regarding the war, maybe Israel, things like that, that wasn't there, do you think that the plagiarism would have been exposed anyway?
I think that, yeah, I think so. And first of all, just to pick up on your point about the plagiarism was significant. Yeah, it wasn't the matter of forgetting a footnote or having a footnote and not having the right pages. It was a matter of maybe as much as 3 paragraphs verbatim.
Yeah.
Without a footnote. And also, in the acknowledgments, where one is supposed to, with some sincerity, acknowledge the help of a colleague or a friend, she used exactly the same words as some friend of hers had used in another book. So that was kind of not helpful to her case. But I think that Ackman, representative not just of the business community, but of the financial community, who I think he'd like to see basically Harvard undergraduates, all of them prepared to go to work for him rather than the tremendous variety of opportunities they pursue. And in the political arena, the writing of history, it's a program called DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which has grown at a tremendous pace in many universities. And if you are doing some research on the Civil War, and you want to hire a research assistant to help you with a book, the money might not be in the budget, whereas at one time it would have been, because a lot of this is going to DEI. And so there's a tremendous amount of animosity towards that program, even within the academic community. So I think
we're out of time. We're out of time. But in 30 seconds, I'm going to pose this question to you. You've got connections to Harvard in your history, as does your family. We're talking about the right decision, right reason. I'm anointing you right now where you can make the decision whether to keep her as president based on all the facts or what has been presented in terms of plagiarism. Do you think that she needed to go? She needed to resign as president?
Well, that's what you call an easy layup. I wouldn't have had to make that decision because I wouldn't have hired her in the first place.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
She needed more academic chops than she had. She didn't have to be a Pulitzer or Nobel Prize winner, but basically, I think to be president of Harvard, you need some academic chops.
And do you feel that, and again, we have literally 20 seconds here. Do you feel that she was put in that position because she's female and maybe because she's Black?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but
Interesting.
that's not her fault. I mean,
No.
I'm not blaming her for it.
But your point is, I think, valid in terms of, and again, I haven't studied this deeply, that in terms of, as you call it, educational chops, maybe there was some missing there, and somehow it got exposed with the plagiarism. Ronald, great talking with you today. Great case, very topical. I mean, literally, she just resigned a few days ago. If anybody wants to reach out to you, have some questions, maybe you want to pick your brain on something, how do we find you?
You find me at Ronald.Berenbeim, Berenbeim, at gmail.org, or what was Gmail?
.com. Yeah. Excellent.
And please also send suggestions for other case studies you might like me to do.
Yeah, great idea. Well, today's was as I said, very topical and a good one. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.